Hey guys, I know that most of you who are going to be tuning in are already familiar with me. Some of you aren't, so I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Aaron Gore. I am the founder of Fresh Pitch Beverage Consulting, helping you sell your product more effectively, more efficiently, and more strategically. I'm also a contributor to the Beer With Me network on YouTube, three of their shows, as well as the lead writer for BeerCharlotte.com. And you'll see me just about any place where people are ingesting fermented beverages. Today, we're going to be talking about integrating staff beer education into your business. I know that yesterday, the incomparable Ray Daniels actually talked a little bit about the Cicerone program and how to really take charge of your own beer education. Today, we're going to be focusing a little more on how to take charge of the education of your front of house and your sales staff especially, and the why, the how, and the what of going about that. So before we go ahead and get started, we will be trying to make some space for questions at the end, so go ahead and stick with us, but feel free to drop them in the chat if anything does pop in your head. I'll try to answer them as we go as well, make this more of a conversation. All right. There we go. So why is beer education important for your staff? Well, at the end of the day, your front of house and your sales staff, their job is really pretty straightforward. It's to discover the needs of their customers and to pair them with a product that helps fill that need. Well, an educated staff is better able to do so, which leads to more satisfied customers who wind up spending more money. Take, for example, if a customer walks into your brewery tap room, sits down, and bartender asks them what they enjoy drinking, and they say Blue Moon. Well, if you guys have a wit beer on tap, it's going to behoove you for that staff member to know that that Blue Moon is a wit beer, or at least it pretends it's a wit beer. And that's probably what they should be recommending in order to help transfer that customer over to drinking something of yours and leave them a little happier and a little more educated themselves. Same can be said if one of your sales team is out trying to pitch a retail account on picking up some of your beer, and they know that they have a stout line that is going to be kicking by the end of the week. Now, you may only have a porter available, but at the end of the day, a porter and a stout are probably going to satisfy similar needs. Educated staff's better able to communicate that to the customer as well as identify those problems in the first place. Also helps move some slower moving product. If any of you guys out there decided for whatever reason to make a black rye IPA, it's never going to be your top seller, but it's going to do a lot better if you have staff who's able to communicate, well, what that is and what that's going to look like in practice to the customer, but also identify the kind of customers who might be interested in something like that in the first place. Not only does it help them better suit their work and their purposes to your customers' needs, also helps them avoid missing opportunities and making mistakes. Now, the beer is one of the cheapest things that your brewery has available to it. All the things that go into running a brewery, the actual liquid, relatively cheap, but it does cost money. So if you have an uneducated bartender, for example, who doesn't know how to make quality recommendations, identify a customer's needs, and winds up sampling them out on 10 ounces of beer from across your whole range, it's not going to cost that much, but it is going to cost you money. If, for example, you have a customer who says that they really enjoy Pilsners and an uneducated staff member or an undereducated staff member recommends for them an American double IPA, then chances are good they're going to be sending that back because they don't like it. Well, that's 12, 16 ounces of product down the drain, and that's costing you money. Having an employee who knows what they're doing, who is able to have the education and is equipped with the education to do their job better, helps avoid costing you money. More than just that, they're also your brand representatives. I don't care what kind of rock star brewer you think you are, or celebrity brewery owner that you think you are. At the end of the day, for your customers, whether it's in the tap room or your retail customers, the name that they're most going to associate and the face that they're most going to associate with your brand is the one that's in front of them every day. For people in the tap room, that's your servers and bartenders, and for your retailers, that's your sales staff. So essentially, you're handing them the keys to your Porsche every single time that they go out on the floor, or they go out into the market. Wouldn't you be a little interested in giving them some driving lessons before they did that? It's always good to make sure that they are educated so they aren't misrepresenting your brand out to market. Also gives you more opportunity to sell some of those products that otherwise your staff might not be as familiar with. You might know everything there is to know about rock beer. You might know everything there is to know about smoked malt. But if you have a staff who doesn't, they're going to have a much harder time selling something that's already not going to have a real natural pull through in the marketplace. Educating your staff helps with that. It also helps to have an educated staff because it can help to educate your customers. Now, this is valuable for a couple of reasons, but most importantly, educated customers have a tendency to become better craft beer customers for the whole category. Now, the reason for this is pretty simple. At the end of the day, craft beer is a luxury good. I know it's easy to lose sight of that. I know it doesn't always feel like that, but it really is an affordable luxury good, but a luxury good. If someone is just looking to get drunk, there are cheaper, more efficient ways to do so. If someone's just looking for a beer, there are cheaper ones on the market. That I can promise you. When you have an educated staff and they're able to generate educated consumers, those educated consumers are better able to understand the hard work, the passion, and the quality and the storytelling that goes into creating craft beer. That means they're willing to spend a little more money on it because they understand that what they are getting is worth the price. Now, when it comes to education within the brewery environment, for a lot of brewery owners, a lot of managers, they tend to see it as being kind of a one-time deal. Typically, when an employee is first hired, you onboard them, you tell them all about the brand, you tell them the basic policies, and then you shove them out into their responsibilities. The issue is that learning is a lifelong pursuit. And the same can be said about the length of life of their time within your organization. And as such, it tends to take a few stages as you go forward. Now, first off is that onboarding. It is that first impact, that first set of learning. That's when you get those new employees in and you fill them in on the bulk of the information. Here is who we are. Here is what we do. Here are our basic policies and how you do your job. And here are the beers that we have typically on offer. But it doesn't just stop there. It has to be continuing beyond that because you will be rolling out new beers. You will be rolling out new programs. The stories are going to change. The people are going to change. And your staff needs to be made aware of that. That needs to be communicated to them. And they need to continue to be educating themselves and to be educated by you as to those changes as they come. And last but not least is the reinforcement cycle. So this is where just because you've taught somebody something in the past doesn't mean they necessarily understand it. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's permanently set in their mind. And even if they're able to retain it for a while, it's important to constantly be reinforcing that knowledge and making sure that there is no loss and there is no drift along the way. So reinforcing that knowledge, making sure that you are welcoming questions and that you are constantly making sure that they are still responsible for the knowledge you've bequeathed to them with, that's equally important. So this education lifestyle goes into play into creating a culture of learning. Education has to be a habit. It has to be something continual. And this is important for you as employers, as brewery owners, as managers, because you have to take charge of your employees' education. Self-guided learning, it just doesn't really get results. And more than that, osmosis doesn't get results. Just because somebody happens to be working there, I've seen a lot of brewery owners who think to themselves, and some have even said this out loud, they're working here day in, day out. They see the beers day in, day out. They're interacting with the customers day in, day out. They'll get it. They'll pick it up. The cans are coming across the shelf. They're definitely bound to learn about it. In practice, that doesn't always happen. Actually, in practice, that usually doesn't happen. Your staff members got a lot on their minds. They have their daily responsibilities. They have their interests outside of work. They have their kids. They have relationships. They have to worry about the fact that somebody just puked in the bathroom and they got to clean it up. You can't expect them to necessarily take charge of their own education if you're not going to show an interest yourself and you're not going to give them the tools to do so. It's also important to make sure that communication is happening at all times, even above a formal educational setting. You need to be communicating changes that are coming to your staff. And staff members, you need to be communicating what you're seeing on the floor and what you're understanding and the things that you're seeing up to management and up to ownership. It's the only way that you're going to be able to get a good dialogue going and make sure that nothing's getting lost in translation. Of all the things that go wrong for all of my brewery clients, the one that is probably the most common and causes the most issues is a lack of communication down and up the chain. So make sure that that communication is happening. This also helps build that culture of learning. When people are they know that they're going to be receiving that knowledge, and they know it's something that's expected of them. When you are educating and when you are trying to build in an education program for your staff, it's also important that you keep it informative, but also make sure that it is accessible. At the end of the day, most of the staff that you hire, especially front of house and sales team, the people who aren't actively in the brew house, they're not necessarily going to be beer geeks. And that's okay. You didn't hire them to be beer geeks. You hired your servers to provide good customer service. You hired your bar staff to be able to pour drinks well and to be able to interact with customers well. You hired your sales team to be able to sell your beer. You don't need to be preoccupied necessarily with them coming in with that knowledge, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be trying to instill it in them. You can teach beer knowledge a lot more easily than you can teach those core job skills. If you're hiring an accountant, you don't necessarily need an accountant who's also a beer geek. It's the same for these positions as well. You can teach your accountant about the things specific to the industry, and it's on them to go ahead and learn some of that themselves, but you need to make sure that you are keeping this information easy to digest, easy to understand, easy to retain, and easy to apply. Because at the end of the day, they need to be able to take this knowledge and do something useful with it. So as much as you might find it interesting, things like, gravity readings or strike temp, or, the grist, at the end of the day, what they need to know are things like what hop varieties are in there, what flavors they should be looking for, how was it made, and what's the story behind it? Because these are the kind of things that your customers care about. I mean, we've all had a handful of customers who are dedicated homebrewers, and they might care about some of those details, but they're also smart enough not to expect, typical bar staff or typical salespeople to necessarily know that off the top of their head. It's important to give them knowledge that they're going to be able to actually use and give it to them in a way that they're going to be able to actually learn. It's also important to make education something that's regular and repeatable. Now, this means if you're going to do it in the form of meetings, and I highly recommend doing it in the form of some sort of mandatory meeting, make sure that it's happening on the schedule and it's happening at regular intervals. Now, this does a couple of things, but first and foremost, it makes it something predictable so that they can schedule around it. It's very easy to let education slide to the back burner. As brewery owners, you guys have a million things on your mind. You guys are dealing with fires you have to put out on a daily basis, problems that you have to resolve on a daily basis. It's important to you guys to be able to set that time aside and realize that this doesn't need to be the priority, but it needs to be a priority. It also helps reinforce that this is something that is expected and helps structure the learning. People in general tend to do better if they have a sense of organization and they have a sense of structure, at least when it comes to meeting expectations that are presented to them. There's the same reason sticking to a format can be very useful. If you've ever done any research into corporate America and any of these strategies that some of the top companies in the world are using, they'll tell you if you walk into a meeting, you need to have a format and you need to have an agenda ahead of time. Because if you don't, it's very, very easy for meetings to get extremely off base extremely quickly. We've all been in a meeting where we've said to ourselves, couldn't this have been an email? Now, sometimes it's because there just wasn't enough content for a meeting, but a lot of times it's because what you actually came in there to talk about, you never get to that point. So make sure that you do it regularly, make sure that it is structured, and make sure that you have a repeatable format, because that'll help reinforce the learning and reinforce that this is something that people are going to be held accountable for. And last but not least, if you're holding any sort of educational events, just make sure that you're giving access to your staff as well. I've seen breweries that don't have any sort of staff education program set up, but they'll be running a, flavors and aromas of malt class that customers can buy into. Well, a little handful of 4 types of malt is cheap. And if you're able to have your staff, if they want to participate in that and be able to learn from that and enjoy that, that's so useful in so many ways. For one, customers love to be on the same side of the bar as the staff. They love to be able to interact with them in a more informal setting. So you're facilitating that and really leaving your customers feeling more like part of the team. But not only that, you're also helping to train your staff and helping to give them further information that they can use to better satisfy your customers' needs. Because the last thing that you want is your customers to be more educated than your staff because they actually attended these classes. And when it comes to actually teaching about beer, one thing that you have to have is you have to have somebody leading the class. You can't, or meeting or educational hangout, however you want to phrase it, you need somebody who's in charge and somebody who's guiding it. as I said before, self-guided learning rarely works. People have too much on their mind. They have too many things that they have to worry about outside of their day-to-day responsibilities in addition to their day-to-day responsibilities. So if you leave it to them to educate themselves, it's just not going to happen. And no matter how much you might consider that a fair expectation, they're just never going to be able to get there. So make sure that you do have that structure and you do have somebody who's able to hold people accountable and make sure that that education is happening. Also, make sure that you're educating as a group where possible. With onboarding, there might be times where you're bringing somebody in solo and there's not much that you can do about that. But for any of those continuing education classes, make sure that you're getting several people or the entire front of house staff or the entire sales team all in there at once. Now, this helps make sure that all messaging is on point, make sure everybody's getting taught things the same way, and that when a customer comes in and they meet Daryl or they meet George or they meet Beth, they're getting the same information presented to them the same way every time. Helps reduce confusion, and it helps reduce issues of potential mistakes or misrepresentation. But it also helps create a system of accountability. People know that everybody else is also learning the same stuff, and they're there learning together. That allows them to help reinforce between each other what they are learning and work together to really make sure that that information is being retained. So that's the best way to really make sure that people are not only going to absorb the information, but they are continuing that education outside of just the formal setting. It's also important to make sure that you never discourage any sort of questions for that exact same reason. I know it can be frustrating to explain to somebody the difference between a lager and an ale 100 times, and for whatever reason, they just can't get it. But at the end of the day, it does you no good if they don't understand it. So you're a lot better off just answering the question. Don't beat them down about that. Don't get frustrated. Just answer the question, because somebody might also have been confused about that and needed to have that question answered. You'd be amazed how often questions can take the conversation, take the educational setting in a direction you didn't really see coming. You might not have thought of a way to present the information, or you might not have thought about something that you didn't realize was foundational, because to you, it's just second nature. Allowing questions goes a long way towards helping people approach the topic from a different standpoint and really push you to teach it from a different standpoint that might work better for them. And it also helps facilitate communication and conversation, which can get them further interested in learning as just part of their daily lives and as something that they carry even beyond what you're just teaching them because it's part of their job responsibilities. One big thing that is important is any new beer that comes out, the entire staff needs to try. I don't care if they like it or not. It is absolutely amazing how often I have seen people at breweries, people at bars, people at tap rooms who just won't try sours. They just don't like them, and they refuse to. And, I'll sell it to somebody if they're looking for a sour, but I don't need to try it. Well, you can't sell what you don't know. To give you an example, I hate peanut butter. And I am convinced that the entire world is stuck in one giant collective delusion where you all think peanut butter is good when obviously it is disgusting trash. But I'll be damned if I am trying to sell a peanut butter porter. I'm going to try it. Now I'm going to try a lot of them. And I'm going to be able through that to learn the difference between a good peanut butter porter and a bad peanut butter porter. That way I can better serve my customers and better be able to move that product. And when I say good peanut butter porter, I mean none of them, because they are all trash. Peanut butter is disgusting. But it is important that all the staff does try every single beer that comes out. It helps them learn about it, because even if they do not like that style, they can better recognize what a customer might like about it if they've tried it themselves. And we all know that over time, if you try enough things, if you sample enough different beer styles, funnily enough, eventually you start enjoying them. And even if that doesn't happen, the educational component is still very important. And last but not least, when it comes to teaching beer, don't be afraid to assign homework. Now, when I say homework, I don't mean actual homework, especially for a lot of your front of house staff. A lot of those guys are hourly, and it's either difficult to, or not really okay to, or outright illegal to assign them work outside of their designated hours. But it's not about giving them worksheets. It's not about giving them tests. It's not about giving them, assigned reading. It's just about making sure that they know that they should be looking to improve their beer knowledge, and they should be thinking more consciously about beer in their day-to-day lives. So if you're a brewer and you have a bunch of books available. I don't think I've ever met a brewer who doesn't have 10, 12, 15 books about beer. Make those available for the staff if they want to borrow it. I mean, you can even make a spreadsheet and track it if you're worried about them running off with it, but encourage that. That's how you let them know that education is a priority to you and that it's something that you're encouraging, that you're excited for them to be getting interested in. One of my favorite things to do at meetings is to go ahead and have every staff member tell you about a beer that they've had in the previous week. Have them describe it to you. Have them tell you what it tasted like, what it smelled like, what did they like about it, what did they not like about it. Did they like the can art? How was it presented to them? It's not about being right or wrong. It's about getting them thinking and making sure that they are drinking and looking at beer consciously, because that is a part of what they do for a living. So we've talked about why teaching beer is important. We've talked about some of the ways to do it, but what should you actually be teaching? Well, first and foremost, you need to be talking about your company's story. I think that's kind of goes without saying. I mean, every member of your staff, they need to know who founded the company. They need to know the history of the company. Why did you found it? Where did the name come from? What's the story behind that? What's the ethos of the brewery? Because those are the things that are ingrained in every aspect of your brand. Every single beer, no matter what style it is, no matter what it is, it goes back to those core concepts of who you are as a business, as a company, and as a family. Now, new beers is another one that really needs to be covered. Every single new beer needs to be taught. Beers that don't get taught don't get sold. That's pretty straightforward. So make sure that in these classes, not only is everybody tasting every beer, but that tasting is guided. You need to make sure that the messaging is accurate and that people know what they should be looking for. That way they can tell customers what they can expect. So go through not just the quantitative aspects. I mean, it's good for staff to know IBU and ABV, but at the end of the day, they need to know those qualitative aspects as well. What flavors, what aromas can they expect? What's the story of the beer? Why did this get made? If you have a beer that you're making to raise money for the Pink Boots Society, then you need to make sure that the staff knows that, because if they don't know it, then they can't communicate it to the customer. And a story only has value if it's communicated. If you have a beer that uses some special process that's unique to your brewery in the area, that's something that the staff needs to be made aware of, and they need to be able to communicate that. So make sure you talk about those qualitative aspects and talk about those things that people might be interested in knowing when they are trying to decide what they're going to order off the menu. It's also important to talk about translatable styles. So in that previous example, if someone walked in and said they enjoy Blue Moon and you have a wit beer on tap, that's pretty rock solid. That's basic beer education. They like a wit beer, you have a wit beer. But it's also important for them to know that if you don't have a wit beer on and that same person walks in wanting Blue Moon, if you have a Hefeweizen or an American wheat, might not be exactly what they're looking for, but chances are good it's still going to fill that need and it's still going to satisfy what they're really looking for out of their drinking experience that day. So make sure that you cover that. Just give a couple of examples for any of your staff on any given beer of different styles that people might be looking for that this would be a good sub in for. It helps avoid those missed opportunities where someone walks away thinking you don't have anything for them. And what you really had was the chance to expose them to something that's close enough to where it can bring them one step closer to really having a broader palate and in having a satisfied experience leaving your brewery. It's also important for people to understand on your staff how beer is made. Now, I'm not talking necessarily about knowing the whole process start to finish. Your average staff member, whether sales or front of house, they don't necessarily need to know all the details of, a step infusion mash versus a single infusion versus a decoction mash. They don't necessarily need to know all the details about, biotransformation in the dry hopping process due to hops. What they need to understand is the basics that you have barley malt and what that is. You mix that with water, you boil it with hops, you ferment it with yeast, and you get this wonderful substance called beer. And if there are any terms that you're going to use that relate to process, they need to know those too. There's nothing more frustrating than having somebody ask about dry hopping because you're labeling a hazy IPA as being double dry hopped, and their eyes just glaze over. They need to understand what dry hopping is, and even if they don't know all the details, they should at least be able to explain it in layman's terms. Same thing goes for barrel aging. The same thing goes to any process that you're going to present as part of your marketing. These are things that they need to at least understand the basics of. They also need to understand how to pour beer. This should go without saying, but the number of people I've seen working in bars for 10 plus years and they still don't know how to pour a damn pint is startling. So go over that with them. Go over the whole process of what a draft system is. Again, not in heavy detail. They just need to understand that the CO2 pushes the liquid through these lines out this tap. Most of them have at least a surface level knowledge of it, but when you go over it with them, it helps in a couple of ways. First and foremost, if there's something go wrong, helps them identify that. If they have a beer that's just foaming like crazy, then rather than assuming that's just the way the beer is, they might know to escalate that to management because it might be an issue with a regulator. It might be an issue with a leaky line. It might be an issue with any number of things along the stream from keg to glass. They need to be able to identify off flavors. If somebody says that they have something that smells a lot like cream corn, they might not necessarily need to know that it's DMS. They might not necessarily need to know how DMS comes about, but they need to be able to say, hey, that's not what this beer is probably supposed to taste like. Probably has something to do with the process from here to there. DMS being a terrible example because it usually doesn't come from the draft lines, but topic for another day. They also need to know about how to pour a beer, but also about proper glassware if that's something that is important to your brewery. If that's something that your brewery doesn't worry about, if you guys just do everything in shakers, that's just fine. But if proper glassware and proper serving is something that you guys do place a priority on, it needs to be communicated, and they need to be aware for every beer that you have so they're not doing guesswork. So that if a person comes into the brewery and they order a Pilsner and the first time around they got it in a nice Pilsner flute, the next time they're not going to be getting it in a tulip glass or in a dimpled mug and be wondering why the difference. Is it the same beer? Are these different sizes? They need to know that it's the same beer every time so that they can feel comfortable in what they've chosen. And they can feel comfortable in the service that they've received. Also helps to have people know how to properly pour beer into all those glasses to avoid waste. Again, going back to any of that beer that's foaming over, any of that beer that's going into the drain, it might not be much per ounce, but it adds up pretty quickly over the course of the year. And it's also incredibly hard to track. By having a well-trained staff, they're able to prevent some of that from happening. It also helps if they're able to identify dirty glassware. This is basic stuff. All of this all together takes about 10 minutes. And when you're able to identify dirty glassware, it helps keep you from serving dirty glassware because there are definitely some customers who don't care, and the dirty glass mafia is always out there, but it does make a visual difference. And even if people don't pick up on it and can't identify it, it will reflect in their subconscious about the experience that they've had and how they perceive your beer. And last but not least, beer and food pairing. Don't spend too much time on that. As somebody who really likes beer and food pairing and who's really passionate about it, at the end of the day, any sommelier can tell you that you have some people who are going to insist on drinking nothing but Cabernet Sauvignon, and they are going to also insist on ordering the tilapia. There's nothing that you can do about that. And it's just not worth your time at most of your places to go ahead and correcting them. The expectation's just not there the same way it would be in a fine dining restaurant for your staff to necessarily make corrective suggestions. That being said, a couple of things to teach your staff, just some of those basic pairings. If you have an Irish stout on and you guys serve oysters, Guinness and oyster is a classic pairing. That's something for them to know. And it can help guide consumer choice, and it can really help enhance the experience. If you have a nice chocolatey stout and you guys also serve ice cream, then dessert beer and dessert go well together. And the other big thing to keep in mind is just talk to them about matching intensities. If a customer asks for a recommendation on a beer and your staff member is making one, it's good not to recommend the imperial stout with something really delicate and light like a salad. It's good for them not to necessarily recommend something super delicate like a Helles Lager with a big, bold double chocolate cake. These are basic things. It's about as far as you probably need to go on beer and food pairing unless it is a huge part of your program. There's a handful like Moody Tongue that do place a lot of focus on it. But in general, just make sure that they have those basic principles and they should be fine. So starting to wrap up here as we're coming close on time. Encouraging education, again, all of this is really designed to create a culture of education. From those weekly or monthly education meetings, from doing everything that you can to really foster that interest and foster that passion in your staff. The whole goal is to create a passion for learning so that all of that burden isn't on you making them learn so much as making them interested in learning. So remember that it's all about being enriching, not punitive. The goal here isn't to punish people for not learning everything as quickly as you'd like them to. The goal is to help them learn and help them comprehend the type of things that are going to help them do their job better. So find ways to help and find ways to incentivize and find ways to encourage. Don't just browbeat and don't just yell at them for not getting it the first time. This is new to a lot of people. A beer stipend. This is another one that can be really, really useful and relatively inexpensive. If you give some of your staff $50 a month to go ahead and buy beer, not just at your spot, but anywhere, then that's a really good encouragement for them to be a little riskier in their beer purchases and try things that they might otherwise not have. You have no idea how many people have been in this industry for a while and still have never had Orville or still have never had anything by Weihenstephan. Still have never had Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. When you give them the opportunity to not only learn, but also to explore a little on their own time, you'd be amazed how much that drives their interest in continuing to learn and continuing to develop on their own. By that same token, there are some fantastic educational programs. For example, Cicerone's Certified Beer Server Program. It's only $69, and really what you are getting out of it as an employer is not only a passionate employee who's probably going to want to continue learning about beer, but also a base level of knowledge that you can rest assured that they have. And above and beyond that, it's also something you can brag about if your whole staff is CBS certified. So consider reimbursing that and consider really putting that forward. And the same goes for any other sort of professional certifications or conferences. Allow them to explore and learn on their own time because it will pay you dividends down the road. Last but not least on that front, if any of your front of house staff or sales staff want to spend time in the brew house, I've almost never met a brewer who really hates having an extra pair of hands he can make lug all the heavy stuff back in the brew house. So let them. It'll give them more of a personal feeling of investment, a personal feeling of accomplishment, and really, in general, just make them feel that much more involved in that beer once it does reach the glass. People tend to put a lot more effort into things that they feel a personal connection to, and it will help them learn. And honestly, it can be some good, helpful labor without having to hire a cellarman or somebody else who's just going to get yelled at by the head brewer all day. So remember, at the end of the day, the most important things are it's all about comprehension, not parroting. Anybody can memorize a handful of things to say back in given circumstances. What you want here is for people to understand. You want them to truly grasp this information and actually be able to put it to use. Also, educating customers, it should never be alienating. It's not about gatekeeping. It's not about barriers to entry. It's about making sure that as customers want to learn, that learning is provided for them. And as they have questions, those questions are answered fully and correctly. But it's not about bombarding them with knowledge or showing off. At the end of the day, not all of your customers are going to care enough to want to learn. For a lot of people, they just like having something to drink. Maybe they're just looking for an alcohol delivery mechanism. Maybe it's just a way to socialize with coworkers, or maybe they just like the taste of beer and they don't like to think too hard about it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. They might really care about music. They might really care about dogs. They might really care about the history of the Crimean War. That's okay. And you need to be able to accept that while still acknowledging the fact that there are plenty of customers out there who are going to care. And when you provide your staff with the resources to help educate them, not only is that going to be good for your business, but it's going to be good for the industry as a whole. A few resources for education. Cicerone program, I highly recommend. They're doing some excellent work over there. I know it's one of those things that gets debated back and forth, mostly by people on the internet with way too much to do. But I do think they provide an excellent resource and an excellent program. I highly recommend people look them up. The Brewers Association also has way more resources even for non-members than you would imagine. Through craftbeer.com, they have a whole set of programs from everything from beer and food pairing all the way to basic beer education that you can access either for free or just by being a member, which most of your organizations are. And there are plenty of additional resources. We lived in a truly charmed time. We have thousands of books on the topic of beer. A lot of them are surprisingly cheap. A lot of them can get surprisingly granular. There's one out right now that's really good. That's about nothing but Vienna lager. So look them up and encourage your staff to as well. Plenty of websites out there. We don't have anything so complete as a Wine Folly, but there's a lot of great beer education sites and, classes, whether online or in person, that can really help people to take that next step towards really engaging and taking charge of their education going forward. Well, that's my presentation, guys. Thank you so much for tuning on in. If anybody has any questions, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for those now. If not, then I am perfectly happy to just hang out here and riff to myself for a bit. I am drinking the Timber Yard Brewing Company Insight Double IPA. Never had anything from these guys. They're from East Brookfield, Mass. My brother-in-law, Johnny, thank you so much for bringing this down for my birthday. Brought me down some nice stuff from the Northeast. So cheers to that. And if anybody is interested in taking more command of their education and of their employees' education, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me online at www.freshpitchconsulting.com. I have a wide variety of consultative services, everything from helping you sell your beer better to helping improve your taproom efficiency, all the way down to hosting beer dinners and doing staff education if it's something that you're not necessarily comfortable doing yourself. So please don't hesitate. I have nothing but time on my hands, and if it gets me out of watching Muppet Babies for the 8,000th time, I am perfectly happy to do that. A nice presentation. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining me. Thanks for watching. Thank you, Janice. Well, now I just want to know what everybody's drinking today. If we're going to be sitting here riffing for a bit, go ahead and drop them in the comments. If anybody's drinking Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, you get 10 minutes of free consultative services. That's not enough to get anything accomplished. I just really love that beer. Also, sorry if I look a little like I'm got beads of sweat coming down my eyebrow. I think our AC broke over the weekend. So, yeah, it's like 83 degrees in here, and I don't handle heat real well. Oh, Brewing Rookie said it's noon, so you're drinking water. You do realize that there's like a national pandemic. No one's going to judge you. So drop a little bit of malt, drop a few hops in that water, and we'll call it even. And thank you for tuning in on YouTube as well, it looks like. Always nice to see people crossing platforms. It's one of the things I love that Andrew's been doing with this whole event. All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes, see if anybody else drops in with a question. If not, guys, have an excellent day. It's been so nice hanging out with you, and keep an eye out for more presentations going forward. I know that you guys just can't get enough of me. From Brewing Rookie, I'm really into beer education. What made you start a consulting business? So I have been in the beer industry for about 10 years. Started off in sales, coming straight out of a job in IT. Just really took a knack for it. One of those cases that, like you hear so often in this industry, where you find your calling in your second career. Once I started realizing that this was an industry of amateurs, and it's a beautiful thing. So beer industry is an industry of amateurs. You got a lot of people who come into this from other careers. The problem is it means you have a lot of people who are engineers or lawyers or in IT. They don't necessarily have backgrounds in the kind of stuff that they are doing within this industry. So I realized pretty quickly that, there was a lot of people who were basically making it up as they went along. And as I accumulated experience and was having success in the industry, realized it probably behooved me to do what I can for the industry by sharing some of that knowledge. So I've been doing consulting for about 5 years now, full time for about a year. Been going really, really well. And it's one of those things. Most breweries don't have huge fundamental problems. What they have is a lack of information, and they don't know what they don't know. So that if you're able to help them bridge that gap, most of them can have quite a bit of success. Well, all right, guys, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and sign out now. Have an excellent day and see you around.